This is the More to Life Than Money podcast. Real people, real stories, real conversations about wealth and abundance with your host, J.W. Rayhans.
Welcome, everybody, to the More to Life Than Money podcast. Thank you for joining us again for another episode. And today, this is going to be kind of an adventurous conversation because we're with someone who has a very diverse background, a cultured background, has lived in a number of different places throughout the U.S., focuses on people, focuses on faith and his family, and has also been one of these guys that is just willing to take risk throughout his life to help him get where he is today. And at this very same time, he's so community-minded. And when you think about his professional background, it would not give you any clue whatsoever to what his actual personality is like. And so, David, man, it is just outstanding for us to have some time together. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, the things that you'll share with people in order to help them really create the life that they want through your story, through the life that you've lived. And so I'm looking forward to what we get to talk about today.
Now, this is going to be fun. I like going on adventures.
Oh, yeah. I can tell that you do. I can tell that you do. And this is definitely going to be an adventure. So for any of you listening, just be ready. Be ready to think about, how do I apply some of these things in my life? How do I really, connect with pieces of David's story in my own way? And that's what we're going to really hope for in our conversation today. But I tell you what, here's where I'd like to start is you're in banking, David. Yeah. And you know what? I'm just going to say it. When a lot of us think of banking, we don't necessarily think of adventurous, outgoing, cross the boundaries sort of personalities when we think of banking, at least traditional banking. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's safe to say most people think bankers are boring.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said it rather than me.
Yeah, I knew where you were going.
Because your professional career has always been in banking, but we know that isn't necessarily what your original dream was. It wasn't necessarily what your original path was that you were hoping for. No. And so let's go back for just a moment. Let's start with childhood. And you're from Louisiana. You grew up in Louisiana for the most part. And so start there. Tell us a little bit about what it's like growing up as a kid in Louisiana when you did.
Well, I didn't think that was as weird back then as I do now. It's a lot of different than I think people expect. And I've been so far removed from it, I always have to constantly take myself back to remember, who I am and what I'm all about and how I was raised to be. And, I came from a long line of really frontier people and farmers, and they had moved to Louisiana in the early 1800s and just kind of carved a life out there. So what was passed on to me was a lot of those really kind of community-minded, take care of the people that are around you, step up and do the right thing for people because, they don't really have anything to fall back on. If it isn't for this close group of people that are there, then, who's going to do it? And so I learned from the men in my life, my father, my grandfathers, about how to be, and they always wanted me to be more than a farmer. I was the first in the history of my family that went off to college and then went and got a professional job somewhere. My dad had several jobs where he was running a hardware store to pay the bills and then helping out on the farm with my grandfather, which didn't quite cover everything, and that's why being a small farmer down there just isn't economically viable. But he was a photographer. He did all these sorts of things that, just to get by. And so I think for both me and my sister, my parents just wanted us to have the most successful life, and eventually came to that realization that it wasn't going to be in Louisiana. I was going to have to go do something somewhere else.
Makes sense.
And so I grew up little farming community in the Louisiana Delta, just close to the river there on the east side of the state. And it was a typical kind of Louisiana story. we had all sorts of creatures everywhere, and bugs and snakes and alligators and all the things that you stereotypically kind of expect there, and all the good food and all that stuff. We ate crawfish in the spring and all that, just like you would expect in kind of that down home Louisiana kind of feel. But
so let me pause you there for just a moment, because there are a couple things that I want to highlight that I hope everybody catches. One is, for the people who meet you today, I don't think they would expect that was your childhood, that was your background. You have a very professional demeanor. You've had a great amount of success when it comes to leadership in a number of different ways, not just in banking, but also in some other community organizations that you're part of, nonprofits that you're a part of. And so right now, people see you as this successful leader in the community, in business, and yet you talk about this farming community that you grew up in, and even having to break some cycles and trends in the way that you approached life after that childhood, because the family was in farming, but yet there was other expectations for what you would be able to do and what you would carry your life out to be. And so let's plug in right there in terms of, what type of ways did your parents encourage you to maybe pursue a different life than what you were living as a kid, or even what they were providing in your childhood? When you think about Louisiana versus other places that you've lived, and the risks that it took to make changes and go against what family traditions were.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a plan for me all along, with as heavily focused as my parents, especially my mom, was on my grades and my academic performance and that sort of thing. That came pretty easy early on, but as like the academic rigor picked up later, it was more of a challenge. But I was expected to make all A's, and I was expected to write essays and be a part of all these contests and things like that to build my resume of what I was capable of doing. And I started school a year early. Mom put me in the kindergarten a year early, so I graduated high school right after I turned 17.
Okay.
And my plan, because I had spent 4 years in Army JROTC and was my battalion XO, was that I was going to go to West Point, and that was what my next step was. My parents were both veterans. That was like the ideal situation for David, is that he's going to go into the service, and that wasn't meant to be.
Okay.
Like a lot of things, like my musical career and all that sort of stuff, sometimes it's not due to like a mistake that you make or anything like that. It's just not your path.
Yeah.
And for me, I had a congenital heart murmur that really isn't kind of anything that's to be concerned about, but it kept me out of the Army.
Yeah.
And so I did not, even though I did well on the ASVAB and all the other stuff that I had to do to get in there, wasn't meant to be. So instead of fall of 1997, starting my military career, which I think I probably would have graduated sometime in the months prior to 9/11, that would have been a totally different experience. And so I went to business school. I take that back. I went to engineering school for like a month or two.
Yeah.
And then decided that wasn't going to work. And so I went and just I got a business degree and an MBA from my college. And then when I graduated from there, I was out of Louisiana. I had to go somewhere else. So that's when I went to Dallas, and then Phoenix after that, LA. So, like you mentioned, I moved around quite a bit. And so all I took out of Louisiana really was my values.
Okay.
The way I was raised to be, and then had to try and overlay that with the communities that I was now a part of, which are giant, I struggled with that for the longest time, especially when I was in Los Angeles, of like, how can I really make an impact here?
Yeah.
What?
Just because it was so much bigger than what you were used to.
You're just dwarfed by the scale of it.
Yeah.
And I really didn't know how to do that until I got back to Arizona. And so for the last several years, as you mentioned, I've just really immersed myself in community. It's really what I knew to do, and I even adjusted my career to be a part of organizations that were more community focused, community minded, because I just don't know how else to be.
Yeah.
I'm not transactional, and I'm not someone who just kind of goes from quarterly goal to quarterly goal and eventually I'm going to retire, it's got to be more fulfilling than that.
Yeah. And I want us to talk a little bit about that as well. And so in a way to highlight for any of you listening, if you caught on to it, there were some nuggets in there of like the recipe that you've had for success. One, in terms of, I'm going to go back to highlighting what you shared about your mom and having high expectations for you. There was expectations for, the way to perform in school and the way to, carry yourself. And I think sometimes it's important that we remember it's okay to have high expectations for people as long as you love on them and you care about them and you're doing it because of really wanting the best for them. That's actually something that can equip people to live the greatest life that they possibly can and experience success with the gifts and the talents they've been given. So I want to highlight that, but there's also turning points. Mm-hmm. We can't always plan out exactly how our life is going to turn out. So sometimes you have these turning points that are different than the original expectations or the original outlook, if you will, that you had on life. And so these are just different pieces that have been a part of your path that I want to make sure that everybody catches as they're taking notes. But then I want to go into the way that you break down making like these big cities feel small. And so the way I want to highlight that is let's go back and let's talk about what are some of those values. So if you think of the values that you talk about that have led to your success, what would you say are some of the greatest values that have influenced your decision making and influenced your path and influenced the success that you've been able to experience?
We in the office we talk a lot about two really key values that I've started to really believe drive a lot of the decision making that I have, which are kindness and generosity. And we view a lot of things that we do or we don't do through the lens of that. Like, are we being generous with people? Are we operating from a mindset of abundance where there's enough for everybody and we have more than we need and we can share with people, whether that's time or energy or other kind of resources, to think about it very broadly in how we apply generosity. And are we doing that in a way that's kind to people? Yeah. All of those things really matter. But personally, I reflect on the things that drive me forward, and I get into some of the things that are in the realm of integrity, like doing the things that you say that you're going to do and showing up for people and making good on your obligations and things that you commit to so that people know that they can count on you. Yeah. I think if I can kind of trace back the things that have made me successful with all of the community ventures that I've been involved with, is that every single one of them had a period of time where I wanted to quit. Okay. And I didn't. Yeah. Like there were just points where I'm like, this isn't going anywhere. We're not making any progress with this. Why am I wasting my time? Mm-hmm. Like those thoughts go through my head and I go, yeah, well, the mission's not over yet. Mm-hmm. So we're going to keep going. And when I look back on having pushed through those things, I realize that underneath that there's a value that's hiding there, which is just an absolute dedication to just continuing along a path where you said, this is important to me. Mm-hmm. If literacy is important in our community, like it is to me, there will be those times where you want to just say, oh, shoot, man, how are we going to ever make any progress with this when Arizona's toward the bottom of the list? Yeah. How can we get people to care about it? And maybe we should just give up. Yeah. And I moved past that particular feeling many, many times and been glad that I did.
Yeah. I appreciate you really highlighting that too, of that being, there's an underlying value in not quitting. Even when you think that there might be a moment where it's like, look, this isn't going the way that I thought it would. This isn't, turning out the way that I anticipated. And we all have those moments where we think, okay, maybe this just isn't it. Maybe this is the stopping point. But yet you pursued through that, and that's where you see the underlying value of dedication. But even then, it's rooted back in what you shared at the beginning, in kindness and generosity. And I really appreciate the way you said that comes from an abundance mindset, because obviously you have to have an abundance mindset if you're going to be generous in the resources that you have, whatever those resources look like. And then you talked specifically about integrity, but you defined it for us in the way that you see integrity, which is showing up for people and doing the things that you said you were going to do and pursuing a mission, staying committed to it. And that's where that dedication comes in. And in each one of those, what I'm hoping for any of you listening is that you think through those and you say, okay, how am I applying those in my life? Or how could I apply those in my life? Because David, I can assure you, someone listening right now is probably at a quitting point. Mm-hmm. They're probably in their minds going, you know what? Is this really worth it? All this effort I'm putting in, it doesn't seem like anyone else around me cares about it as much as I do. And they're having one of those moments, they're listening to you and they're listening to us talk about stay with it, stick with it, see it through. And what you highlighted for us was identifying why you're passionate about it. Why is it that you pursued this effort in the first place? Take yourself back to that point and allow that to give you the energy necessary to get you past the quitting point so you really can experience the rewards on the other side. I want to highlight one of the things that you mentioned that you obviously have a great passion about, which is literacy. It's shown up in the different nonprofit things that you're involved in. It's shown up in the community things that you're involved in. It shows up in the way that you are involved with junior achievement as well as others. We even talked about a new one that you might, have some conversations around when it comes to positive pathways. And so why is literacy so important to you?
I come from a background of people putting a high emphasis on education.
Okay.
Especially with my own parents. My mom was a teacher. All the plans that she had for me and my sister revolved around us getting a good education. Mm-hmm. And we went through the public school system in a rural farming community with a K through 12 school. And we saw how that investment in education could transform lives and increase the economic opportunity that a lot of the kids from when you look at the demographics of the place where I grew up, the average household income is around half of what the national average is.
Wow.
So it's one of the most impoverished regions in the country, and the only weapon that you have to fight that is education.
Okay.
It's all you have. Mm-hmm. You can't depend on, especially like where we were, you can't depend on the government to come in and change things. You just have to take things into your own hands and realize that the future is with our youth. Mm-hmm. It always has been, always will be. And when we fail to invest in them, we can't complain about how the world looks 10, 20 years from now or how it does now if we haven't made that investment. Mm-hmm. And I've always, especially when I was a kid and before I was able to vote, it was like I recognized it then that I was depending on other people to have my best interests in mind. Yeah. Because our kids don't necessarily have the voice yet.
That's right.
They don't have the ability to have influence over things that are going to shape their life. They depend on us to do it. Mm-hmm. If we lose our focus on education, I don't know what the future looks like, but it's certainly not as bright as it could be. Yeah. And as I've been involved with literacy, and I've seen how certain communities that we share this town with are disproportionately impacted by that lack of investment. Yeah. It means that we've got more work to do. When our Hispanic and our Black and our Native kids are far below even the poor results that we have in Arizona, where less than 40% of our kids are reading at or above grade level in third grade. Yeah. I don't think we can look at Arizona as being, one of the most advanced states in its economy if we're failing in this area. Mm-hmm. And I continue to be driven by this notion that everything that we consider to be great here, all the things that we brag about when it comes to our economy and how fast we're growing and how many people want to move here, all of that can disappear if we fail to invest in our kids. And I'm relentless about it. I'm a huge advocate for public schools. I'm a product of that. I love the way that kids get to interact with people from diverse backgrounds in that environment and really kind of learn how to be a part of a community, you know, and contribute to it rather than just be, separate from that in a group of people that is relatively homogenous. So I have this huge just drive all the time to be focused on education, and all the people that are out there doing that work. They do a lot more work than me every single day out there just working for these kids. I have a lot of admiration for that.
Yeah. Well, and you even mentioned, education as a weapon, especially when we look at various areas of our own communities, or wherever people are listening, they'll find those in their own communities as well. In fact, I was just in Oklahoma City last week and got to really tour and be in a community, in a neighborhood that faces challenges. And there were, because of just a few people, there have been major changes made in that community and in that neighborhood because of a couple people just willing to invest in that community. And it came down to education. How do we skill people up? How do we provide them an education? How do we increase their literacy? How do we provide certification programs and really allow them then the ability and the capability to provide for their families in a different way than they've ever been able to before, generationally different than what they experienced in their childhoods. And that's a lot of what I see you involved in. And I want to ask you a personal question, because I think there's going to be a connection in all of this is, when we think about the future, when we think about just how much our kids influence what that future looks like, we're all involved in the future at different phases of life, but our kids are the ones that really start to shape that future when we think about what the future is. In the present, it's what we do with what we have that makes the difference in the present, and what we're doing with our kids and what we're doing with our families and what we're doing with our neighborhoods and our communities to help shape that future. So I know that music has had a major influence in who you are, in your childhood, in your upbringing, various family members that have been involved in music, yourself in a band, playing guitar and heavy metal. I don't know, was your hair ever much longer than it is today?
Yes.
Was it?
Everything about my hair used to be better than it is.
I'm sure there's other people that can relate to that. But if we go beyond traditional education, okay, if we go beyond traditional in the classroom type education, what else do you feel influences the drive that kids have, the future that they see, empowering their vision of themselves and their self-worth? What are other things beyond traditional education, just from your own perspective, that influence that?
Yeah, for me, it was that sense of belonging, to be a part of something that was creative and something that was like just helping me to express myself. And so being a part of all of these different various bands, whether that was, a rock band where I was the singer and guitarist in, or where I was playing trombone in a concert band and touring around, and playing all these shows, that sense of community and the way that people were able to get to know each other and support each other through those things, it's not like to say it's simple as like, oh, get a hobby, but certainly I realized that that those things that we did that were fun with each other helped us to really make those lifelong connections. And it gave me a sense of, what my purpose was and how I could use my creativity in a whole lot of different ways, even if it didn't work out that I was going to be, a rock star, which obviously did. Although it's not quite over yet.
I was just saying, you might have had some moments where you were having rock star visions.
Oh, moments. Yeah. Like it was the only thing on my mind for years and years.
Yeah.
I could see myself there and, playing the big stage.
Life's not over yet.
It's not. That's what I'm saying. Like, I just got to get a little bit more free time back. Maybe if I drop some of these nonprofit boards that I'm on, I can start playing more. But when I think kids, especially nowadays, they're struggling for that belonging, those connections, and the way that it's happening through digital media is just something that's just not working. It's not creating those human connections that make us thrive. And whether that's sports or, my kids are in robotics together, all of these things I think are just so vitally important for the development of kids outside of the academic setting of the classroom. Because there is that part, there's the reading and the writing, the arithmetic, all of the basics that kids have to learn. But the socialization is equally important. I talk to kindergarten teachers all the time who are struggling to get their incoming classes socialized so that they can begin to talk about the curriculum and the learning environment. So we see this as kind of a universal issue that's affecting kids and young adults, is just how do I connect to my community and how do I belong?
Yeah, I want to press on your passion for music a little bit, because when you talk about belonging, there's various common interests that usually will allow someone to help get a sense of that belonging, a feel of that belonging, which we know has all sorts of benefits in terms of self-worth, in terms of self-confidence, in terms of just energy and inspiration, is when they feel that connection to a sense of belonging, that something they're a part of is creating value for them and others in their life. So I want to press on this passion for music, and just from your own perspective, what do you feel the power of music is?
Well, I've come to learn that music is kind of like a language, and it allows us to express concepts that are very difficult to articulate in English or any other language. You know, you can, like, you just think about when you're at a concert and, you know, everybody's kind of feeling that same emotion that's coming from the song, and to be adept at doing that as a creator, as a musician, is just such a powerful way of expression. I think, you know, society and its music are very closely related to each other, and you can kind of tell the health of a society by what its output is. You know, you look at different periods of time where, like for me, it was the early 90s, you know, where that explosion of so many different things in music was happening, to the jazz era, and, you know, even going back further than that to some of the classical music that just, you know, it came out of those times of abundance.
Yeah, it really did.
When there's a deficit of, you know, kind of all these good things, you know, love and hope and just, you know, all the things that we value in our community, I think our music reflects that. And so it kind of moves in both directions, you know, when it comes to music that can shape society in a positive way. If you look at like the bands from like the 60s and 70s and some of the social justice that was being carried on the shoulders of some of these great musical acts back then. You know, music can shape society, music can reflect society. And so it's always been a part of my life, of just having this constant soundtrack playing of, you know, how music is shaping the direction that I'm going, and how it helps me communicate in some ways. Yeah.
Well, and even as you're sharing that, David, you know, I'm thinking of various artists as I'm listening to you describe what music has influenced, you know, time periods or economies or countries or societies. I'm thinking through various artists, these artists that seem to have a great impact on us. And I don't know about you, but it seems like there's times when music can get away with expression in a certain way that no other medium can. It seems like artists can get away with saying things in their songs that maybe they can't always get away with if you're just doing an interview. Or there's a way that you can move people through emotion and spirit through music that just doesn't have the same appeal or energy when it's just, say, spoken word or conversation like what you and I are doing here. And there's other forms like that, like poetry can have that effect. And in fact, even our producer, Derek, we were just talking about a music festival he was just at and talking about the impact of the 90s music and how many of us, you know, really look at that era of music and what it meant. And I think when you look back, it almost takes us to places in time when you listen to music. It takes us to specific moments in time when we listen to music. And so here's where I want to ask you, where do you see the crossover or connection points between the way music has influenced your life into even other areas like your professional life? Where do you see that it's had an impact or an influence or shaped who you are professionally, even though this seems like it's a very different area of your life, but it's really not?
I remember listening to a lot of music that was very focused on social justice. And even, you know, one of my favorite bands of all time is Metallica, and I play a lot of their music personally on my own guitars, and And I think initially when I was a Metallica fan, I just kind of listened to it because of, how loud it was. And then I started to pay attention to the words, and especially, the criticism of governments that were marching us endlessly towards war, and looking at ways of dividing people and creating conflicts, and how wrong that was. You remember when Metallica played in Moscow to 1 million people, if that doesn't tell you like the power of the connection in music, I don't know what is, and what does. And so I've, even the older music that I listen to, all tends to have that same thing, which grounds me, which makes me remember who I am and what I'm all about, and that we kind of stand in solidarity with everyone who, coming from a good place in their heart, wants a better future for everyone who comes after us. And we realize that, some of the things that society has done in the past, those aren't things that we ever want to repeat again. So we can communicate with each other through this collective understanding of music and the artists that we all love. Because if you think about, some of the best ones that ever have come around, they are not divisive political kind of rhetoric. Like, it's to hold a mirror up to us and go, is this who you really want to be? Especially some of the, the heavy metal acts that I listen to, or, my parents didn't like it.
Probably not, right?
Because they only saw
especially
it
with how
level.
loud you played it, I'm sure.
Yeah. There were a few times when I was told to turn it down. But that's why you encourage your kids not to play drums, because drummers are usually where the band has to practice, because it's so hard to move the equipment and everything like that. So for most of the really loud stuff, I was over at the drummer's house where we had.
See, there you go. For any of you listening, there's your parental advice of the episode right there. Don't encourage your kids to play drums, because then the band, everybody else that's loud, has to come over to your place. Right. Unless, of course, you like that. Maybe if you want the loud house, then there you go. Encourage your kids to be drummers.
I got a problem because my son keeps bringing that up. Like, he wants to be a drummer, and I'm like, nah, maybe cello, and maybe try that out for a little while.
Yeah. I tell you what, man, with what you're sharing, here's my hope, especially when it comes to the power of music. For any of you listening, maybe the next few times that you listen to a song, pay attention to the words and the message and the meaning that's really within the music that you're listening to, that's within the song, within the lyrics of what you're listening to. And just allow that to soak in, allow that to inspire you, allow that to have you reflect on what it means to you. What does that message mean? What does that music mean? And then how does it influence the rest of your day? How does it influence decisions that you maybe make that day? How does it influence in the way that you treat someone on that particular day? And that's what I hope maybe all of our listeners will do. The next few songs that they listen to is they'll pay attention to the words, the message, and the meaning, and let that guide them throughout the rest of their day, no matter what kind of day they're having. Because music can be powerful, and music is a great influencer in our world, in our society. You have other things, other people that have been very influential in your life. And so I'm going to lead us into that a little bit in the way that I ask this next question, because I also know that financial literacy is something that's been important to you as well. And so when you think about some of the great meaningful things in your life, and if I start with asking you, what's important about money to you, what would you say?
I've never been all that fixated on money. Like, I've never made a decision about a job where money was a priority. It's always been about more altruistic reasons, or things that would benefit my career in terms of my education or experience in other ways. And I'm glad that I've always led a life that's that way. And I'm glad that I have a wife and a partner that is on the same page as me with that. When we look at the investment that we've made in our kids, because Jessica and I, we made the decision when we were going to have our first that she was going to not look for a job as we were moving around. And that's the thing. When one partner's moving from one city to the next and the other one is always having to reinvent their careers, I just never thought that was very fair. And it wasn't fair to her. And I think that was one of the best decisions that we made as a family, was for her to be able to devote all of her time to our babies.
Yeah.
And that's a tough decision in today's day and age, because everything is so expensive that a lot of families, they feel that pressure that both have had to work. So I've been blessed to be in a line of business like banking, where the benefits are good and it's a great career, but it has, for me to feel fulfilled, it has to represent something more than that.
Yeah.
And I could never really live with myself if I was just doing things solely because of how much money I could make.
Yeah. I hope all of you caught on to that, of even what David shared there in terms of, the decisions that he made weren't financially focused, even though they were beneficial financially. It was more, as you mentioned, altruistic focus. What's the greater meaning in the decision that's being made? And even in terms of you and Jessica deciding, there's a certain way that we want to raise our family, and it might be countercultural to what the majority of families are choosing, but that doesn't make it right or wrong. It doesn't make what other people are doing right or wrong. It's just in terms of you guys looking at what did you find most important in the way that you want to raise your kids. And so you allowed that to be the driver of your decision, as opposed to just what would be most financially beneficial. So I hope all of you picked up on that, because you have had the opportunity to have great benefit in terms of your levels of success, level of finances, being able to provide for your family, provide a lifestyle that you guys enjoy. And it's not been because you're trying to just make the most money that you possibly can. So tell us a little bit about, were there moments, though, where you and Jessica questioned whether you'd made the right decision or not?
I'm sure there were, but they didn't rise to the level of any kind of conflict, because we have evidence of why it was so important and why it works. I mean, we look at our kids and how kind and well-adjusted and how good of people that they are, and then it sort of just deflates the argument of, why would we have done anything differently,
Yeah.
So, she being, more of an entrepreneurial spirit, and that works pretty good when you've got someone who's, a W-2 person.
Yeah.
And so she can explore things that require a bit more flexibility, like her photography and other creative outlets like that too. Especially now that the kids are older. But you just, look, we don't have an exact plan, We don't work through our lives like, here are the milestones that we want to achieve. I think other people do their lives that way. It never worked out for us, because we also have, people in our family that depend on us and that are not as, they're not in the same kind of situation that we are. So, things come up all the time. We've given away a lot of the money that we've had to various things, because we realize that, when you do have some abundance, it's to share, not to hoard.
Yeah.
So, it kind of makes it more difficult to have like this long life, plan or whatever. It just feels like we're winging it sometimes. But
because there's things that come up, right, that you don't plan, and that even couldn't have been planned. And even I want to help everybody catch on to one of the things that you just shared there, is that when you do have some abundance, it's designed to be shared, not hoarded. And see, these are principles that we want to make sure everybody catches on to, because sometimes we're led to believe that certain things are the pursuits that we need to have. Pursue the job that pays the highest income, or, make sure that you're driving towards certain goals that will give you, certain things that you want in life. all of that can be good, but what's the underlying driver? And what do you do with the success that you experience? What do you do with the resources that you experience? What do you do with the abundance that you get to experience? And you mentioning there, it's designed to be shared. That also comes from the values that you mentioned earlier. And see, we're seeing this alignment in your life to your values, the decisions that you make, and then the outcome or the life that you get to live. And so this is off the cuff, but I want to just provide you an opportunity. We'll see what happens. And I don't know whether Jessica will listen to this or not. I hope she does. But if you had an opportunity where it's just you and me right here, no audience, nobody else, and I just said, what are some of the great things you appreciate about Jessica? What would you say?
When we reconnected several years after we first met, and when we first met, the timing wasn't right for either of us, but when we reconnected, she came with an update on her life that it just impacted me so deeply that I think that's really what sparked the true relationship and love that we have, is you get a visibility into the kind of person that someone really is. And she had a couple of nieces, and one was almost 3 and the other one was a few months old, that she had taken into her home along with her mom and her grandfather who had Alzheimer's. And she asked me out on a date, and I said sure. And so it was kind of it was a learning experience for me of seeing someone really step up for their family and make sacrifices personally, which I don't know that anyone would ever be able to really quantify what that means to her, because it was such a significant thing, to really risk it all because no one else could do it. And I still have so much admiration for her and for her ability to do that. And my first instinct was, I can be a partner for you and help with this, because it matters so much. And so I was, when we really connected, it was because I got a good insight into her soul and where she was, and she could tell. Maybe I should ask her this question. that I was a stand-up guy, and that I was gonna not run away from a situation where, quite frankly, other guys had told her like they weren't going to date her because why would you have all this baggage of your family and everything? And for me, it was totally opposite.
Right.
Like it was the attractive thing to me.
Yeah, beautifully stated. Thank you for sharing that with us, and I hope she does get a chance to listen to that and really see how you felt about her and how you continue to feel about her, because you have built this great life together along with your kids. So I want to ask you, as we start to close out our conversation, how would you define wealth and abundance? Those are two words. We've even used those words throughout our conversation, but how would you define them if you were to describe wealth and abundance to someone else?
Well, my grandfather, my dad's dad, we worked that farm together, and I learned most of what it means to be a man from him and from my dad. But when he passed away in 1999, there was nothing that he really left behind. Left behind the land, which was split between my dad and his sister. But as far as inheritance goes, there was nothing of any financial significance that was left behind. And he had one of the largest funerals in the history of my town.
Wow.
Because everyone knew him to be someone that had the values that everybody respected. And people told me this, and I've never heard anyone say anything to the contrary, but he was known as someone who had never had an argument with anybody else in town. And I don't know how you live your life in a small town and never have conflict, but he was that way. So the wealth and abundance that he left behind is something that I don't ever think you can fully take stock of. You if it was numbers and it was bank accounts and things like that, well, you could say, well, this is what he left. But for me, it was something far more valuable. And I see that reflected in my own kids and how it lives on and the legacy that goes. And so I was, what I learned from him was that there's no point in trying to chase things you can't take with you. But what you can leave behind is something far more significant. So hopefully I live my life, in a similar fashion to him.
Yeah. Oh, I hope all of you have made it to this point in the conversation. Rewind that back and just play it over again for that last, 30, 60 seconds. Because David, even just in the way that you described your grandfather, you allowed the wealth and abundance that he built throughout his life to now carry on to others. Because you mentioned the impression that he left with people, the meaning that he had in other people's lives. And that helps shape what your definition of wealth and abundance truly is what is it that's carried on within other people beyond our own current earthly life. And that's where we're going to leave our conversation today. Man, this has been an absolute joy. And I just so much thank you for your openness, your willingness to share your story, the willingness to share the stories of the people that have had influence in your life, for us to have a conversation about music and literacy and education and the power that it can do to influence someone's life in the life that they want to create, that they define. And now your story is going to help inspire others to do the same in their lives. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to give some value to all of us through what you've lived out. This has been outstanding. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it has been a lot of fun. And you were right. It was an adventure. We went to a whole lot of different places. Didn't we? So I appreciate that.
That's
JP.
right.
Yeah.
Any conversation can be an adventure. And so just as we say with every single episode, and any of you that are listening, obviously, if there's any part of David's story that you feel connected to, that you feel inspired by, or really that you think someone else is going to feel inspired by or connected to, let's allow that story to have an influence and impact far beyond what David or I will ever know, and share it with somebody. Share this conversation with someone else that you care about, that you love, because we all know that there's more to life than money.
Thank you for listening to the More to Life Than Money podcast with your host, J.W. Rayhans, financial advisor, jw@rayhansfinancial.com. Guests are not affiliated with or registered with Cetera Wealth Services, LLC. Any information provided by guests is in no way related to Cetera Wealth Services, LLC, or its registered representatives, unless otherwise noted as a representative of Cetera Wealth Services, LLC. The opinions contained in this material are those of the author and not a recommendation or solicitation to buy or sell investment products. This information is from sources believed to be reliable, but Cetera Wealth Services, LLC cannot guarantee or represent that it is accurate or complete. Securities offered through Cetera Wealth Services, LLC, doing insurance business in California as CFGAN Insurance Agency, LLC, California Insurance License Number 0644976, member FINRA/SIPC. Advisory services offered through Cetera Investment Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. California Insurance License Number 0M15552. The views depicted in this material are for informational purposes only and are not necessarily those of Cetera Wealth Services, LLC. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Neither Cetera Wealth Services, LLC, nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice. 313 North Gilbert Road, Suite 200, Gilbert, Arizona 85234.